Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. In this episode, you'll hear from Jor-El Godsey, the president of Heartbeat International, and he's talking to Marc Newman, the author of Contenders. This episode is brought to you by Option Line, a 24/7 pregnancy helpline. Option Line connects women and men with pregnancy-related questions to the life-affirming pregnancy help that's near them. Option Line consultants can even schedule appointments for centers, providing real-time assistance to women when they need it the most. Our consultants are equipped to handle those tough calls even when the center's doors are closed. Through phone, text, email, and chat, Option Line provides women with the immediate care they want, and they connect them with pregnancy help organizations for long-lasting relationships that they need to make healthy choices in their lives. Visit optionline.org to learn more.
Welcome, Dr. Marc Newman, to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm excited to have you on. I first heard Marc speak at a conference I was attending, and I thought, wow, like that guy really knows his stuff. And I think he's studied a little bit about this speaking thing, and then found out later that not only did he study, he teaches it. He's a former director of speech and debate at the University of California at Irvine. He's been a tremendous speaker on the pro-life cause and other causes that we would agree with, values that we share, and currently is a president of Speaker for Life and a training firm dedicated to equipping pro-life advocates nationwide in their messaging and public speaking skills. And so it's a delight to have him with us here on the Pregnancy Help Podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here, Jor-El.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. I know that you could talk on many things for quite a while, but we don't have that long.
It's an occupational hazard.
I know. And not only that, it would be interesting and it'd be quite informative. I do know that. And so we may have you back for other things. But today I really want to talk about your book, which came out last year. Well, maybe now was it 2020? So okay, I haven't quite moved myself into 22.
I haven't either.
So
it's about 18 months old right now.
There we go. So it came out, and what's really interesting, so the book is Contenders, a church-wide strategy to unmask abortion, defeat its advocates, empower Christians, and if that were not enough, change the world, right? So very powerful title and an important book that I had the privilege to read even before it was published. But it's one of those things that, wow, I knew it was important at the time that you've published it, finished it, put it out. And here we are in a year where some amazing things may happen with the Dobbs case. We're seeing the Heartbeat Texas bill kind of continue. That was a surprise to all of us from last September. And here we're facing into Dobbs, which frankly could be a sea change for the pro-life movement, for abortion law, and all that means, in which case a book like Contenders is going to be that much more important.
I hope that's the case. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Supreme Court does with Dobbs. They could go ahead and completely overturn Roe versus Wade and overturn Casey and return the question of abortion back to the states, which is just going to really complicate in a really good way the pro-life movement. Right now, we've been so focused on a national push, and now it's going to become literally a 50 state-by-state battle. And of course, like you said, that's not the only issue that's out there. I think it's intriguing that the Supreme Court has not yet ruled on the heartbeat bill in Texas. And there are a lot of pro-life advocates like myself who are believing that this is a signal that they aren't going to bother to do it, because if they overturn Roe versus Wade, of course, then there won't be any problem with that bill.
And you mentioned that it's going to be a state-by-state battle. And in some ways, and I actually, you talked about this in your book about how really you use this, which is one of my favorite quotes in your book. And there are many. There are many awesome quotes in your book. You said national statistics are numbers, local statistics are neighbors. Now, that's a powerful point for someone speaking and messaging on this issue. But it also, I think, speaks to us about this won't be just a state conversation. There'll be state battles, but that state battle will create local conversations, community conversations, and the opportunity, regardless of where this ends up getting settled, it's going to create opportunity to speak on the issue to those in our community.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating. Actually, it will drop down to the local level. And this is why I think it's so important for all of us to be equipped to be able to message on this issue, especially those people who are messengers in the church. It's got to start there. If it doesn't start there, it's probably not going to go anywhere. So we need to reach out to not just pastors, but also lay leaders in the church. But once we have those local conversations and it makes changes locally, makes changes statewide, Once there are enough states who understand what's truly at stake in the abortion issue, and once they decide that they're going to become a life-affirming state, once we get to enough of those states, it's really funny. People keep saying, well, we're never going to be able to make a change in California. We're never going to be able to make a change in New York. That's not true. Once enough states become life-affirming, then we can revisit this as a national question, revisit it as an issue for a human life amendment, for example, and then truly make it national and have a life-affirming nation. So it's funny how by overturning Roe versus Wade, we return this question back to the states, which of course spills out into all the localities. We message properly on this issue. We change people's hearts, which changes people's actions. And then if we can do it well enough in enough states, we can come back and create a national environment that is positive for the lives of our unborn neighbors. And
one of the best ways to do that is make sure that we are messaging it well, which is really what your book is about, what your passion and heart has been about. It's not just pro-life apologetics and debating the issue. All those things are critical skills to have. It's also messaging well into those moments where you have either that soundbite to deliver to that reporter or to that community leader, or you have an opportunity to really unpack the situation. So this is another good reason why I was delighted to really champion your book. When I saw it, I really did think that it's something that should be on every believer's book reading list to engage, because I think you unpack a lot of things in a way that is engaging, because you go after some of the hard conversations. You structure it. You give out. I think you're like giving out some of your tricks of the trade. Some things you've learned along the way, and you're like letting us in on things that it's taken you kind of years to hone and to refine. And so I very much appreciate that. Let's talk about the issue as it plays out in the church. You said that as well. It's like our faith community is going to have to rise up and speak to this. And this has been one of the areas I think has probably been a constant source of disappointment, is that pastors, faith leaders are not speaking strongly enough to this issue.
It's interesting. I interviewed a host of pregnancy center directors in the creation of this book. And one of the questions that I asked them was, if there was something you had to say to a pastor about your work, what would it be? Now, it's really funny because pregnancy center directors, pregnancy help organization folk, they're mavericks. So they don't actually answer the question. They answer the question the way they wanted to answer it, which was, what I would like all the pastors to know is that we want them speaking about this issue. It literally was the number one response to that question. They want them to speak because they know that they're not. Now, in the first half of, or the first third of the book, we address the issue of messaging in the church and why it's been done so poorly for so long. And I want to let you know, pastors are under tremendous pressure from congregations. And we are not the only 501c3 organization that would like to find our way into their pulpits. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of pastors are afraid to talk about this issue for, I list out about 8 different reasons, but some of the major ones are things like they're afraid it's going to be too political. They're afraid it's going to be too divisive. They're afraid it's going to harm the people in their congregation and make them feel bad. So there's all these reasons that pastors have where they don't want to dive in and talk about the issue. And I have to let you know, if they were true, I could understand it. But once you really evaluate the rationale that pastors have for why they don't preach about abortion from the pulpit, we recognize that not only are the reasons not true, but they actually harm the very people the pastors are in their hearts trying to protect, right? Of course, abortion is a divisive issue. All truth is divisive. It divides the world into people who are supportive of the truth and people who are opposed to the truth. You're always going to be divisive when you make a truth claim. Of course, abortion is going to harm the hearts of people who are post-abortive. But the fact of the matter is that many people, Jor-El, I'm sure you've run into this many times during the course of your career. I'll go speak somewhere and someone will walk up to me and confess an abortion from their past that maybe 30 years ago. And they tell me, I have never told anybody about this. So the silence in the church actually creates a prison for people in the church that they can't find a way out of. They believe that the pastor's silence on abortion before they have an abortion is tacit approval of abortion, because after all, if it was really bad, he'd say something about it. But then immediately following an abortion, the enemy jumps on their shoulder and says, come on, you knew. you knew all along that this was going to take the life of an unborn human being. And you want to know why the pastor doesn't talk about it? Because this is that sin that can't be forgiven. And so why bother talking about a sin that can't be forgiven? And so the enemy places people in thrall to their own sin and makes them believe that they're not fit for the kingdom, that they don't have any place in the kingdom, can't do any good kingdom work. And when pastors gain the courage necessary to stand up in the pulpit and speak about abortion from the pulpit, recognizing that it is not primarily a political issue, but it's primarily a spiritual issue that has political ramifications, right? Then people find that kind of freedom and forgiveness that they're looking for. You know, the research that I've seen from Barna indicate that most women don't believe that when pastors preach about forgiveness from the pulpit, that abortion is included in that forgiveness. They don't think that that's for them. And they also believe that, you know, they're the only ones in church that have ever had an abortion. And so this feeling of isolation, this feeling of unforgiveness really crushes people. And we need to be about preaching liberation. We want to help people to avoid making a bad decision. But for those people who have made that bad decision, we need to help them to find forgiveness in Christ and find not just their own personal redemption, but then to give them a voice to speak to others so that they can avoid making similar mistakes in the future.
And it's counterintuitive to think that, like you said, that they ultimately are harming the individuals that they're trying to protect, and they're muting the message that the church needs to proclaim. You started this by saying, well, we're not the only 501c3. Yes, that's true. And certainly pregnancy centers, well, they're the best 501c3s as far as I'm concerned. But there's this message that is really one of God's truth, God's value for life, the sanctity of life. That's what's not being spoken. That's not what's not being championed. Mark, my conversion to pro-life position occurred in an instant. I had an abortion myself with my girlfriend as a teenager. A couple of years later, I became a believer and was sitting in a church, and the visiting pastor came and he said these words, and I will never forget them, never forget the moment. I feel the sensation I had when I heard these. He said, abortion is not a social issue. And I was like incredulous. I'm like, of course it is. Like I didn't know much, but I knew that it had social reality. And then he said, kind of what you said, abortion is not a political issue. And I was like, what? Of course it is. And then he said this, abortion is a gospel issue. And in that moment, I began to understand the depth of this issue as an affront to God's kingdom, God's people, and God's church. And why aren't churches proclaiming it more often? That's kind of been I think that's what you hear in the heart of the pregnancy centers is why aren't churches speaking and proclaiming this, not just the work of pregnancy centers, but the reality of abortion, the issue that women are facing and men are facing.
I think for a lot of pastors, they've bought into the lie that if you don't have a uterus, you don't get an opinion, right? This has been preached so loudly in the secular media that men don't have any business talking about this because it's a woman's issue. And they buy into this lie. A lot of pastors are ill-equipped to talk about the issue. They've not studied it. And I got to be honest, when you look at a book like David Boonon's book, A Defense of Abortion, and that big, thick philosophical tome, it's easy to look at that and feel overwhelmed, feel like you're never going to be able to grasp this issue well. But the fact of the matter is the abortion issue is not a complex issue. The abortion issue at its core is an unbelievably simple issue, which can be phrased out in three clear sentences, which is it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. This, of course, is what people refer to as the syllogism, right? It's like any other deductive syllogism. If the premises are true and the argument is constructed properly, the conclusion is inescapable. So it's not a difficult subject to master in terms of its basics. But then what pastors are afraid of is that people are going to start asking them questions that they can't answer. And my response to that is, well, do what you've always done your whole life. Study a little bit, right? So if we can study, we can learn how the argument is framed and how it rolls out. And one of the things that I did in this book, is I talked about abortion as a chain of argument, right? That we start with the idea of, our opponents get up and say, well, it's not even a human being. Now, I got to be honest, most of our opponents aren't saying that anymore because they realize, it's just argumentative death. You're going to be pinned to the wall in just a matter of moments. So what they do
except Sotomayor, right? I think she still missed that point.
Don't get me started on her. We'll get to Dobbs, I think, a little bit more, maybe a little later. But yeah, people start there and then they say, oh, okay, it is a human being. Everybody knows that. Embryology teaches us it's a human being, right? Moore, Persad, and Torchia in their book, The Developing Human Clinically Oriented Embryology, a long-standing embryological textbook, speaks very, very clearly that every one of our individual lives began at the moment of conception. So everybody knows that what's in a woman's body from the moment of conception is a human being. The question that they ask then is it a person? Right. And what a pernicious argument, frankly, this is, right? Christopher Kaiser says that in every single case where human beings have constructed a distinction between human beings and human persons, in other words, we have human non-persons and then we have human persons. He says every single time, 100% of the time, without exception, it has been deemed that a moral catastrophe has taken place. Mm-hmm. So why in the world do we think we get it right here, right? Well, we don't. So we talk in the book about the four, Schwartz in his book talks about the four different distinctions that abortion choice advocates make, trying to determine that, what's in the woman's body is not a human person, right? Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, and concludes that none of these are arguments that are morally significant in determining whether or not somebody should live, right? We don't determine that somebody's got more life than others because of how big they are. We don't determine it because you have abilities that other people don't have. We don't determine it on the basis of where you happen to be located. And we certainly don't determine it on how dependent you are. As a matter of fact, exactly the opposite is true, right? Everywhere except in the womb, dependence is an argument for greater legal protection, not less, right? That's why we have the Americans with Disability Act, for example. So we walk them through personhood. And by the way, by the time we get done with personhood, there's no way to manipulate that syllogism in such a way that would make the abortion choice advocacy position correct. So what they do then is they abandon it and they start talking about what we call hard cases: rape, incest, threat to the life of the mother. And so we talk about how we handle those issues. Then they go, oh, well, okay, well, if how we were conceived really doesn't have an impact on what we actually are and why we're valuable, well, then I'm going to shift gears and we'll talk about the impact of the pregnancy on the woman. And this is where you get all the economic arguments, the relational arguments, the emotional arguments, the economic arguments, all of those. And then we walk through those, even though you shouldn't have to, right? Because none of those are relevant in terms of whether or not it's okay, it's morally permissible to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And then finally, of course, at the end of that section, we just rip the mask off and say, there's a lot of people out there that just want to abort children and they don't care what the arguments are. They just want to do it. And you've seen it most recently on the news where you saw those women. Now, I don't know if those were really abortion pills they were taking, and I don't know if they were really pregnant or not. I frankly doubt it. But let's say that they were. Look at the brazenness of that. These are not people who don't know what they're doing. These are people who know exactly what they're doing and believe that we ought to celebrate what they're doing, and that anybody who doesn't get on board is part of the problem.
In that vein, and you call this out in Contenders, you make the statement very strongly, and I don't think it can be said strongly enough: abortion is idolatry.
Yes.
And we see it has, and at the very least, has the features of idolatry. I even in reviewing your book, it had just occurred. Michelle Williams, the actor, had stood up and, with clutching a golden award, and then making the claim about how abortion helped her career. It's like, boy, it's like all the elements were present in that moment, and are really present in this in kind of that radicalness that you see of the woman taking the pill on the news. They did this, by the way. I had the privilege of being on the steps of the Supreme Court during oral arguments, and apparently I didn't see it. I saw it later on the news, but near us was a group of them doing that, supposedly as an act of defiance, so to speak. They were willingly killing. And you're right. And there's a part where the those that are radically aligned for abortion, that really are truly expecting abortion on demand for any reason at any time, are the ones that we probably will never convince, But there's a lot that we can, because I think a lot of people have been swayed by some of these arguments that they haven't had a chance to think them through. And you really run after them hard, and you really, like you said, rip the mask off. And one of the points that you make is that the best explanation for the resistance pro-life advocates encounter when they talk about abortion can be summed up in 3 words: cognitive dissonance theory, right? So you like, and that's what really is behind what people will encounter.
Yes. The fact of the matter is that people have a tremendous capacity to hold conflicting views in their heads at the same time, and it creates a lot of stress. So the problem really is that most of us don't think much about abortion at all. And those who do, the vast majority of them, they think in what I call bumper stickers. They don't really make arguments. They just have bumper sticker statements like "my body, my choice." Don't want an abortion? Don't like abortion? Don't have one. Right? These aren't arguments. They're just bumper stickers. And I think the idea that that abortion choice supporters and advocates don't have to justify or argue for their position is a weakness from the pro-life movement. We find ourselves constantly playing defense, and I think we need to be playing a lot more offense. Because the fact of the matter is they don't have the evidence to back up what they have to say. Now, because cognitive dissonance, which, by the way, is the psychological stress that people experience when anchor beliefs that they have come into conflict with new information, when we can create that stress in a heartbeat. All you have to do is walk in and say the words abortion, and suddenly if people are abortion rights supporters, abortion choice advocates, they're going to feel that stress. And then what we outline in the book is that people have 6 different ways of dealing with that stress. One of the ways is they simply avoid new information, which, people will just go out of their way not to encounter the pro-life message. Big
tech is helping with that, right? They're helping
Absolutely.
People avoid by censoring. Sure.
Right. But the saddest part is, so is the church.
Yeah.
The church is helping people to avoid by not speaking about the issue. And that allows people to maintain, even if the pastor didn't want to talk about abortion because of the political elements, I would think you'd want to talk about it just from the truth elements, right? We're supposed to tell people the truth, and our culture is just flat out lying to people. And we ought to be, the purveyors of truth in our culture. We ought to uphold that standard. But people will avoid it. People will hear the information. They'll twist it to fit what they already believe. People will hear the information, but they don't hear it often enough so that they set it off to the side and don't want to think about it anymore. And that allows them to continue on in their previous way of thinking and acting. Some people will just devalue the new information. Some people will rationalize it and say, well, it doesn't really apply to me. But finally, some people will hear the new information and go, you know what, that's true. And I'm going to abandon the way I used to think, and I'm going to adopt the new way of thinking. Now, what I tell the people that I train is, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that out of the 6 different ways people have to respond to the cognitive dissonance we create by talking about abortion, in 5 out of the 6 ways, they maintain their old way of thinking. And what I try to explain to people is persuasion is hard. If we want to persuade people, this is why pastors cannot get up and say, oh, I've already preached about abortion. Yeah, I did it in 2005, I think, on Sanctity of Human Life Sunday, once, after telling everybody before the sermon was going to happen what I would be preaching about, so that they could make sure that if they were going to be uncomfortable by that sermon, they could just go to another church or just not attend that Sunday. Which is why when I preach in churches, I ask the pastors right up front, please don't tell anybody that I'm coming to preach about abortion. Matter of fact, I've got a title for my sermon that's great. It's called A City Full of Idols, because nobody thinks they're an idolater. Right? So, oh yeah, we should go and listen to what all those terrible idolaters are doing. Okay. And then we start talking about, Old Testament Molech worship, right? In Old Testament Molech worship, there was already a temple, or there was already a tabernacle. People had the ability to go and inquire of God, right? And so if they had problems, they could inquire of God. The problem is the God of the Israelites, he was not the kind of God that you bargained with. You know what I mean? He's the kind of God that you listened to and obeyed. So if you knew that the answer you were going to get was probably not the one you wanted, then you would just go up to the high place, because even though God, I've just finished reading through the Pentateuch, even though God commanded Israel to destroy all of the high places, to burn all of the molten gods, they never quite did it. And so if you had this question, maybe you could go up the hill to get a second opinion from another God, right? And the priest of Molech would meet you, and you could pour out your problems to them. Maybe your crops weren't doing well or whatever. And he'd say, not a problem. my great God Molech, we can solve your problem. All you got to do is come on up and bring your kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so people would bring their child up. And in order for the sacrifice to be valuable, no tears could be shed. So they would hand the child over. Now you can imagine the child's going to scream because he's going to be placed in the arms of a molten god with a big fire burning in the belly of the idol. And the thing was made out of bronze, so it was very, very hot. So they would beat drums really, really loudly so that it would drown out the screams of the children. And then they would make these sacrifices in hopes of getting something. Nothing has changed. We now walk into an abortion clinic, and the woman has problems. She doesn't come to her pastor, by the way, and research over and over again says women will not come to their pastors, which is why pregnancy help organizations are so needed. And it's not because the pastors are bad or the pastors are going to give that woman bad advice, but it's pregnancy help organizations. They are like they're like the mission group that speaks the indigenous language. And we don't send our pastors to go into countries where they don't speak that language. Why would we do that here? The women want to come to a place where people have subject matter expertise, have a long history of compassion, and we have that in the pregnancy help organization movement. So, but if they did come to the church, right, they got a pretty good idea what the pastor is going to say. So instead they go to another place down the street where they meet with the priest of Molech. They don't call them that, but that's what they are. And they make them a deal. They say, oh, you're telling me you're going to lose your boyfriend? You tell me you're going to lose your scholarship? You're not going to be able to complete college? You're not going to be able to get that promotion you were looking for? Don't worry about it. We can take care of all that. All you have to do is walk down the yellow line and give us your child. So she gets up on the altar, which is made out of stainless steel. The priest comes with his own instruments. They don't have to beat drums anymore because the child is going to be killed in the silence of his or her mother's womb. We're just much more effective child killers than the Molech worshipers were. We actually built surgical instruments designed to perform that function. And then when the child comes out, where do they place it most of the time if they don't sell it to sell that child's body? By the way, that child who the woman was told was just a blob of tissue and not a human being, now suddenly is a valuable human being whose body parts can be sold for money. But if they don't sell them for money, it goes into a medical incinerator. Right? Sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
It's not like Molech worship. It is Molech worship. C.S. Lewis told us in the Screwtape Letters, right, that our orders from the high command are to conceal ourselves, the demon says. Right? We don't get the advantage of making magicians, but it's really, really effective because these people don't even perceive us. They just think they're worshiping forces. And so the women come in. It doesn't say First Church of Moloch over the top, but everything's the same. They have a problem and they think that the only way to solve the problem is to get rid of their unborn child. That if they do that, it'll solve the difficulties that they're facing. But you and I both know, and as does everybody who works in pregnancy help organizations that has post-abortion counseling, that many women go on to regret it, that many relationships still get blown apart. I just need to emphasize that even if the woman after the abortion thinks it was the best thing that ever happened to her in her life, like Michelle Williams said, that doesn't make it right. Mm-hmm. She still sacrificed the life of her own unborn child in order to advance her own career. And at some point, the full weight of that is going to be manifest to her. I don't know how long it'll take, but at some point, I think that will happen.
And the good news there, if there is good news, is that the God of the universe is ready to meet them there and provide mercy and care and extend forgiveness. If they're willing to seek it, he is willing to provide it. Absolutely. That's the good side of that, as I said, if there is. Now, one of the things we have in common, I don't know if we haven't talked about this a great deal, but we both have sons named Joel.
Yes.
And in your book, and as if you haven't picked up on this already, you actually make this statement, which I thought when I was rereading this, just preparing for our conversation, I realized, wow, this is pretty bold. You said, get into arguments.
Yes.
You go on to say, speak up and engage the will. And I think it's all about this kind of like take advantage and bring it to them. That's that offensive effort. And what you just dialogued about the reality of Molech worship as part of that, the issues of abortion and women suffering from abortions. You didn't mention earlier, you were on the kind side of the issues that woman was presenting to the abortionist, but sometimes it's, I'm being trafficked. I'm suffering. I'm being forced or coerced, and of course they are not sympathetic to those things. They're only sympathetic to abortion. So we need to get into arguments. We need to bring this message to people. And again, that's going to come, I think, even more important as we move into this, hopefully a 50-state battle, community by community. We're going to need to be more aggressive and proactive in bringing the fight into the arena, because otherwise we'll just get shut out by being ignored, by being marginalized. So we need to be direct. And this is where I think the book is great and needs to be not just on the shelf, but needs to be actively read, because you've unpacked some of it before, but there's a ton more in the book that can help equip people. And I think it's worth not just reading, but rereading and kind of take that in. How do you see this in the Dobbs world that we're looking into? How do you see it unfolding as we approach the summer?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think it's important that even if we are going to get into arguments, and we do, getting into arguments does not mean that we have to be a jerk, right? There's a lot of people out there, frankly, I hate to say it, who are arguing the abortion issue, and I wouldn't want to listen to them either, because they're always sounding attacking and personal. What I tell everybody is, listen, we attack arguments, not people, right? When the Apostle Paul talks about, tearing down strongholds and taking every thought captive, right? We're not taking people captive. We want to help people come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ and move out of a kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of God's glorious light. We have to win those people. We do not have to be doormats either. So what I tell people to do is focus on the arguments. One of the best things about being a pro-life advocate is the evidence is on our side. So simply identify the arguments, ask people to justify their position, and say, hey, if I can show you evidence on the other side that demonstrates that that is not true, would you be intellectually consistent and be willing to change your mind? Now, a lot of people aren't right away. Persuasion often happens incrementally over time. I was at the Genocide Awareness Project at Cal State San Marcos, and I interacted with a young man. I addressed this. I talk about this in my book. And the guy gets up, and when we're all done, I've just data dumped on him, all this evidence. And he said, I want to thank you for sharing your perspective. And he turned around and walked away. And I went, stop, come back. What? I said, I want to make something clear. I did not share my perspective. I just shared with you evidence from embryology. I just shared with you evidence from Planned Parenthood indicating that human life begins at conception. By the way, if you folks, if they've never seen it, and I'd be happy to provide this for people, this is a photocopy that I can send to people called Plan Your Children for Health and Happiness. I do happen to own an original here. They asked the question, abortion, birth control, is it an abortion? And their response is definitely not. An abortion kills the life of a baby after it has begun. It is dangerous to your life and health. It may make you sterile so that when you want a child, you cannot have it. Who published that? Well, Planned Parenthood, World Population. This is what Planned Parenthood told every woman back then. And it's not a one-off. They also put out this little thing called The Gift of Life. This was published in 1951 by the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And it's a sex education manual. And it says if one of the male sperm meets and unites with an egg cell, a new life begins. Does Planned Parenthood know when life begins? Yes. So as Dobbs rolls out, if it does go the right way, and which I firmly am believing that it's going to, you get some sense from the Chief Justice that he would like to try to find a way to split the baby in half. But I got a feeling that if it is going to go 5-4, that I think that he will join the majority just so he can write the opinion, because the most senior member of the majority gets to write the opinion. So I think if it gets overturned, we move into a 50-state battle. I think we have to do two things. Number one, we have to secure our gains in states that have trigger laws. So there will be states that are going to immediately outlaw abortion as soon as Roe versus Wade is overturned. But please do not believe that the opponents of life are going to sit idly by and just let that happen. Robin Marty has a book out called Handbook for a Post-Roe America. And in this book, she lays out precisely the strategy they intend to engage in order to get the camel's nose under the tent and reintroduce abortion in these states that are going to have these trigger laws. So the first thing we need to do is we have to solidify our states so that we have clear pro-life states where people know why they are pro-life. We can't just rely on the law and go, well, the law's on our side, so we're good. We're not killing babies, so that's good. Folks, for many states who have those trigger laws, there's a state bordering them that won't.
Right.
We have to engage in an intellectual inoculation of especially our young people against abortion advocacy and ideology. It's not going to happen in sound bites. We have to make the case. It's got to start in the church, and then it's got to move out into the culture. Then once we've got that established, we also need to be going out into these states that are hardcore: New York, California, Illinois, because now there is no barrier to passing legislation that will limit or eliminate abortion. And so we need to be going in there and making that case. Now, you and I, Jor-El, know, right, because of cancel culture and everything else, we may find it very difficult to get onto campus, for example, but we should never find it difficult to get into churches. And then the people from the churches can get onto the campus. And we need to be rolling this out. We don't have millions and millions of dollars, to advocate our position on the airwaves. But I will tell you this: if Roe versus Wade is overturned, the very next thing I want to see is the federal government to defund Planned Parenthood and take away that $600 million that they're using right now to oppose us in the public sphere. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to get out there. And my friend Kirk Walden wrote a wonderful book called The Wall, where he talks about how pregnancy help organizations can be wonderfully funded by only a fraction of people who want to check the box pro-life, donating just a little bit. This is not beyond the reach. I think one of the reasons people haven't is they've just felt powerless. They felt there's nothing we can do. I'm telling you, there's a lot we can do, but we have to get on board with our pregnancy help organizations. We have to make sure they're fully funded. We have to put out more and more of them. When I first started this, like you, Jor-El, if you'll recall, there was about 2,500 abortion clinics and about 700 pregnancy help organizations.
That's right.
Now there's about 700 abortion clinics and over 2,600 pregnancy help organizations. So we're winning this battle, and we have to keep winning. Folks, please don't be like the person in the horror film where she picks up the shovel and smacks the serial killer in the head. He falls to the ground, and what does she do? Inevitably, right? She drops the shovel, screams, and runs away. No, you keep hitting them with the shovel till it goes away. So if it looks like we're winning, all I'm trying to tell you is that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, we're going to be on the 50-yard line. I don't want us to stop at the 50-yard line, at the 30-yard line, at the 20-yard line, at the 5-yard line. We need to push all the way over into the end zone. We need to keep pushing till we get across the finish line. We want to create a culture that is affirming of life from the moment of conception until natural death. And we've got to be out there making the case for life, messaging in our churches, in our civic groups, in our schools, and not allowing the other side to have free reign to say whatever they want.
Excellent point. I don't know a better place to wrap up our time together than that. I just one practical tip that I want to add into this, because largely this is the pregnancy help community that is digesting these podcasts. And you rightly mentioned the community and all of those people, the youth. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. But we can start with our own donors and our own supporters. I'm concerned that some of our own donors think that reversing Roe is the goal line, and that's not. We know that. Those that live this day in and day out, we know that that's not the case, and we will not finish. And the goal line really is until life is protected in law and in culture, right? So those things need to happen, but the ones that we can communicate with right now are the ones that are on our donor list and our database that we're writing or should be writing newsletters and equipping them with the kind of messaging and the kind of arguments and the kind of understanding that you describe in your book, The Contenders. So again, I bring that back. I want to make sure, encourage everyone to get it, read it, buy it, hand it to your pastor or your youth leader or anyone that you think needs that information and needs to know that. So I appreciate it. Any last thoughts? Mark, what are you working on right now? What's going on that you're doing next?
This is turning out to be the busiest year of my life. I'm keynoting a lot of fundraising banquets for pregnancy help organizations. And we're also teaching, when I go out and do those, we often train pastors. And then I usually do a 3-hour apologetics class in the evening for them. And I'm doing a number of those that aren't even associated with banquets. The Applied Bioethics program that was started by myself, John Enser, and Scott Klusendorf has found a home at Cedarville University. So we'll be teaching 2 classes at Cedarville this summer, and we'll also be teaching 2 classes at South Florida Bible College. So we're starting to move into what I guess I would call Pro-Life 3.0, where we're going to be professionalizing this movement and helping people to get college credit for learning how to defend the lives of the unborn. So all of those kinds of things are going on. It's been nutty, but happily, here we are. I do think we need to make these claims. I do think we need to go out to the pregnancy help organizations and help them to make these claims. And I think it's really important for them to understand. Let me tell you a brief story. Jana Pinson down at the pregnancy center of the Coastal Bend told me this story. It was great. After the Texas passed their heartbeat bill, woman comes in with her daughter, young daughter. She's pregnant. Woman is livid, angry. Boy, you pro-life people, you're so terrible. You're taking away the rights from my daughter. And now look at look at her. She's pregnant. So they get her up on the ultrasound table. They put that wand on her. And mom and now grandma see the baby on the ultrasound screen. Mom's heart melts. Now they're both in parenting classes, right? This is what we're going to see more of. We don't need less resources if Dobbs is upheld. We are going to need to double, triple, quadruple our resources, because a lot of people who would have gone to an abortion clinic are now going to want to know, are you going to put feet to what you said? Do you really care about women who are experiencing untimely pregnancy? And the pregnancy help movement needs to rise up with one voice and say yes. And that is going to require our donors to step up and also our donor base to grow.
Absolutely.
There's no time to be on the sidelines. Now's the time to get fully invested in this battle, because we have a real opportunity to win it, and we shouldn't shrink away. We ought to double down.
Awesome. Can't say it better. The church, the pregnancy help movement, I think already has risen up. It's the church that's going to need to join the pregnancy help movement in even greater force and to a greater degree. That's going to be the answer. Thank you so much, Mark.
Amen.
I really appreciate your time. Grateful for the opportunity to visit, and look forward to doing it again. We'll have to do this again sooner.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me, Jor-El. God bless you, sir.
Hey, Mark, can you tell us if you have a website or someplace that people can reach you and get more information about speaking or your book?
Yes. You can go to speakerforlife.com. I wasn't cool enough to use the number 4, so it's actually SPEAKERFORLIFE, life.com. And also, Jor-El, you mentioned people might want to get these books. We've had a number of pregnancy help organizations want to buy the books in bulk. If you want to do that, please don't do that on Amazon. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg. We have a bulk pricing for people who want to get the book and hand them out to ministry leaders in their area. So all they have to do is contact us through Speaker for Life, and we can get that information out to them.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, hey, thanks for your time today. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode, be sure to hit subscribe. And thanks again for listening to this episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast.